Styled by Science CEOs is hosted by me, Megan Martis.
And me, Ayo Egby. We are young CEOs and founders of ventures in the clothing industry. I am the founder of Hangyo, a premium clothing care company.
And I'm the founder of Clovo, a natural undergarment company. With our shared backgrounds in science and engineering, we take a unique lens to talk about sustainability, representation, and innovation.
To do this, we bring on incredible change makers in the clothing industry to grow awareness and positive change.
Today, our changemaker is Professor Tseng, who is an assistant professor of environmental studies and physics at Colgate University. She has a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering and earth and environmental science from UC Irvine, a master's in environmental engineering and science from Stanford University, and a PhD in environmental engineering from UC Irvine. She is an expert on plastic and plasticizers in water and rural water quality. Today, she'll be talking about the impact that personal care products have on the environment and the controversy surrounding Thinx underwear.
So welcome, Professor Tseng. How are you doing today?
I am fine. Today is a great day here in Hamilton, New York.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much for coming on. To start off, we would love to hear more about your academic journey.
So when I was an undergrad, you were probably once undergrads, and I was thinking about what I want to major in. And so I went to a state school, and of course, the state schools want you to kind of choose a major right away. And then you feel like your life decides right now. And I always wanted to do something with the environment. And so I decided to narrow down into, either environmental engineering or environmental science. And the reason why I chose environmental engineering, I graduated with an environmental engineering degree and PhD. But the reason why I started out as an environmental engineering degree major was because I wanted to do something, not just study something, but actually to implement change and solutions to the environment. And I feel like engineering does that. But spoiler alert, when I graduated, I was double majoring in both. So eventually I got degrees from both. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said that's really nice.
Yes, thank you. And so then how did I begin to study for my PhD? This also had to do with my undergraduate experience, and I hounded one of my first research mentors, Professor Eric Saltzman, who did not work on water issues. And I really wanted to work on water issues because I learned during my first year of undergrad that we Western states in general use so much water from the Colorado River. When the water enters into the Gulf of California next to Baja California, the water is so muddy because there's so little volume left. The water is so muddy that the once thriving fishing industry was devastated and just collapsed. And so of course there's no water for the fish, there's no water for fishing industry, and the injustice kind of made me want to pursue water issues. And also this is not just specific to one region. There are multiple different examples in the world that's similar to this. And so I hounded down my professor, and he was very nice, and he offered me a research opportunity in his lab. And from there I found out I really like doing research, and I decided to pursue research opportunities beyond my undergrad, and then eventually pursued a PhD in environmental engineering.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And I don't know if you were aware, but Professor Tseng, I actually did research with her for about 3 years at Colgate, and she really inspired me to also become really interested in water systems and the effects that we have on them.
Wow, that's so impressive. I love how your journey has kind of been something that you've walked into, like you've found areas that you care about and seen injustice, and you were persistent in finding ways to make that more more of a reality of your work. And so really admire that, and would love to dig in more into your research. And can you provide us a little bit of a summary of your research and interesting findings that you found over the past years, specifically in the personal care and personal product space?
Yeah, of course. So so of course, like there are many things that we're currently doing in the lab. Currently, I'm pursuing like microplastics, how they interact with personal care products, and with a bunch of Colgate students, and our finding showed that personal care products in water can attach themselves to plastic, either big or small. It doesn't matter the size, but they will travel with the plastic to wherever the plastic can go. And so that's something that's really concerning, because that means they can accumulate more and more of the personal care products, and then fish or worms or you know birds, they may ingest these things, and then they will get a higher dose of the personal care products in their body. And a lot of times, this is kind of into another of the past studies I did with my colleagues. A lot of times, these chemicals, personal care products, they're not derived from natural sources. They're coming from petroleum products. And in 2000, I guess, when I was a graduate student, so when I was in grad school, we studied like how wastewater sludge, how we use carbon dating to study the wastewater's age. So we carbon dated sludge in wastewater. And so we found out that we use so much of these petroleum derived products that we actually made our sludge older, meaning that when we test these sludge, it seemed like it's coming from decades ago. And it's just,
Wow.
yeah, they're just older.
That's very scary.
That's, yeah.
So yeah, and also it has many implications, right? So if we use petroleum products, they eventually may be emitted as carbon dioxide. And when they are emitted as carbon dioxide, um, it's like when we take things from the ground, take carbon from the ground and then release it into the air. So this will have some implications with how we account for carbon dioxide emissions, right? And so this is kind of interesting, a little side side note about the implications of this study.
Wow, that is scary. Decades. You got me at the decades. Oh my goodness. There's also another, pretty interesting topic, which really Megan has been kind of educating me on and sharing more about, and wanted to hand the baton off to Megan, kind of talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I remember you had sent me an email the other day about how your lab work is now expanding into Thinx underwear, since you have like a personal connection to that brand. And I would love to hear more about what kind of like research you've done with that so far, and also just explaining what is going on with Thinx right now.
So this is a study that I would like to start, and I've been just collecting like information about how clothing is kind of clothing additives. I would say clothing additives are find their way into the, our daily wardrobe. So as Megan mentioned, this piqued my interest because I used Thinx underwear, and that was why it caught my attention at first, and also because I have studied something called the PFAS, in the past, in 2008 when I was a master's student, and in 2012 to 2015 when I was a postdoc at the University of California, Los Angeles, as a postdoc. So first I was looking at how those things are connected with each other, and I'm like really interested in like how they how those two things like seemingly not connected to each other came together. So the report was from last year. First, I want to explain what PFASs are, and then I'll explain what Thinx underwear is. So PFAS, PFAS, stands for poly or perfluoroalkyl substances. And there are a group of thousands of chemicals that are commonly referred to as forever chemicals. They're called forever chemicals because they are notoriously hard to degrade naturally in the environment. There is a study that showed that there is a bacteria that can degrade it naturally, but that is still not fast enough to degrade all the PFASs around in the world. So now, because they're really hard to degrade, they can be found already in human blood. Probably all of us have a little bit in our blood or in our tissue. For like carnivores, in carnivore animals, they can have a lot higher PFAS concentration in their tissues and in their blood, just due to the bioaccumulation of this group of chemicals. And we have been using them for probably 50 years or more. And because of this, and because they're so widely used, they've been used in firefighting foams, in nonstick cookware, in upholstery, just anything that prevents like things sticking or some sort of resistance to dirt. Because of this, they've been widely used, and these chemicals are really, really hard to degrade, and therefore they are everywhere right now. So there are PFASs. So now the Thinx underwear. The Thinx underwear is one of the most like popular brand for something called the menstrual underwear. So menstrual underwear is so that you, when you wear these kinds of underwear, you don't need to use single-use menstrual products like pads and tampons. So these are really to help us to be sustainable and green in our daily practices for women, especially, right? So what happened was that there's a journalist, Jessie and Choi, last year in January 2020, who was interested in what's in like her underwear. She was a Thinx user, and so she sent a sample to Professor Graham Peasley at the Notre Dame University, and they found that there were a very high level of fluorine in the underwear, and so much so that it could have only come from chemicals that have a lot of fluorines on it. And one thing about PFASs is they're long chains of carbon with a lot of fluorines on the carbon. And the reason why they are not degradable is because the carbon and the fluorine have very, very strong bond. And so they are really, really hard to degrade. So instead of looking at thousands of chemicals, they're looking for fluorine. If there are fluorine, there's an indication that this chemical exists. So that's why they were looking for fluorine in the underwear. They found a lot of really high concentration of fluorine, and that's how they deduced that there must be PFASs on the underwear. And of course, as a scientist, when I first saw this, I was like, this is one data point, right? Like one person sending one pair, not one pair, one set of samples to, scientists over there to look at the concentration. And I was like, okay, so there's one data point. And then I went on to the Thinx website, and the Thinx underwears are all certified by this certification standard called Oekotex, OEKOTEX. So they actually look for on clothing for PFASs, but only 15 of the most common PFASs. So we have thousands of PFASs, and then they're looking for 15 of them, right? So why is this a problem? So in the beginning, when PFAS were manufactured, there are a lot of PFAS that are made with really long chains of like carbon and a lot of fluorines on them. And since we know that they are really hard to degrade over time, the companies have been using shorter and shorter chains of carbons and less fluorinated, less fluorine attached to the carbons. And so they're more easily degraded, but they're still going to cause a problem when the carbon and fluorine bond eventually will reach a point that it might not be degradable. So that's why we have a lot more like chemicals now, and perhaps Oekotex is only looking for 15, but there are perhaps more PFASs on the underwear. And so now there is a new study in the last month, May 2020. In the last month, 2021. I'm still in last year. So in May 2021, last month, there is another independent study by a report by a blog called Mamavation. Mamavation is a blog. Now it's a group of people who are looking for chemicals in their daily life, and they were looking at all sorts of like menstrual underwear, and they found that 65% of them contain a really high concentration of fluorine. That means they were putting in these chemicals in the Thinx underwear, or things like underwear, like menstrual underwear, because I would guess that these chemicals help repel things, so it would be easier to wash, and also they may help the non-staining part of the underwear, and so so that the implication could be health, right? So over the years, because so many people have been exposed, and now there are many taps, wells, drinking water wells being contaminated with PFAS. We're really not, we're actually not sure what health impacts we have, but we can anecdotally know what health impacts have had on human health in the past. So we can see that there might be some cancer that may be correlated with the exposure to PFAS. And we also could see that some people with thyroid issues could have been exposed to PFAS in the past. And it also kind of interferes with the estrogen system, so that there might be a little bit of like fertility issues and like puberty, early puberty issues in women as well. And so what this really means is that like so after tracking this story and just looking at different things, is that okay, so now we know that these chemicals exist on these clothing, right? So what does that mean for us? So first of all, like, you know, certifications, even though they're for like, you know, standards and how OTEC is looking to raise the standards in clothing and, you know, be more sustainable, but healthy and sustainable. But it's not helping. It's it only looks at a certain range of chemicals. Nobody will look into thousands of individual chemicals, right? PFAS is a group of thousands of chemicals. And so that's one of the things, like what certification really means, right? Like you have many clothing labels with different certifications. And so this is just something that we have to think about. What, you know, we trust certain products because of certification, but does these certification really mean like like chemical free, for example? So that's one of the issues. Another issue is that like what happens afterwards. Like we're exposed to PFAS using these underwear, right? And not only that, like let's say, you know, the health risk is minimal. Let's say like if these chemicals go into the wastewater treatment, isolate water and wastewater. So wastewater doesn't really treat these chemicals. Wastewater treatment doesn't really treat these chemicals. And when the water is released into the environment is going to have these chemicals. So that's just another layer of, you know, what you use is eventually going to end up to where it ends up. And we have to think about what we do to the environment just by examining the things that we use every day. Yeah. So yeah, so now there's a lawsuit because of this in Los Angeles, and they are currently moving forward as of a week ago, and it's a class action lawsuit. So yeah.
Yeah, that is just terrifying, especially since like Thinx underwear is so tight on your body and absolutely scary. So I'm guessing you've stopped wearing it since learning about this.
I stopped wearing it. There is of course there are, if you were to look into it, there are menstrual underwears that do not have any fluorine at all, so you can have alternatives.
That's great. Yeah, that's great to hear because, yeah. So it's very curious as to why some of them have them and why some of them don't. Do you notice any differences between the two that you've worn?
So I think the ones, for example, things have different layers, and it's just one piece of underwear. And I before I started using things, I was using reusable pads, like cloth based, and that was just cotton and just like layers of cotton. It's like I don't, if you don't mind me saying this, it's kind of like wearing a diaper, kind of in a way. So there are alternatives to this. Of course, you can use like the menstrual cups, the there are, again, the reusable cotton ones. And then there's also a brand of underwear that sells the underwear, but also gives you the option to insert another layer to help protect, to help with the menstruation part. So that's something that is also an option. I think that because Thinx is trying to simplify the underwear in all in one underwear, so that might have be the case. But I am not sure about the other 65% of underwear, why they added in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a such a big thing too, because you also mentioned the implications that that could have beyond just the underwear, beyond just like the consumer, also to the environment and to the water system. And so, yeah, thank you for educating us on that, because it's so crazy to know that that's happening in underwear, something that people wear every day. And so, yeah, that's a important thing to mention. I think a really cool thing that I've seen in my journey, I think maybe Megan as well, is representation, and that being a big driver into us feeling and believing that we can do what we do. I know for me, it started in high school. I saw a woman who, she was owning a company. She looked like me, and I was like, oh wow, like, because she did it, I can do it too. And I think we've already seen just how incredible you are and the amazing research that you've done, and it's very inspiring, and very much admire you a lot. And so I'd love for you to talk about your how you view like being a woman in STEM and your experience in that, and yeah, just that whole kind of world. Let us know about that, and why
Yes.
representation is important too.
Yes. So I so being a woman in STEM, when I was growing up, I this same as you, I was and actually all the people that I saw as role models, they were all men. And my professors were men, my research advisors were men. And so when I was getting into research, I didn't know that like being a woman is like in STEM was so powerful. Like I didn't understand it until later, possibly in grad school. I see that there are gender dynamics, and of course, like I'm a woman of color, and so I didn't know how to deal with issues, like because I didn't have female mentors um, alerting me to issues that might have happened, you know.
Right.
And so to me, it was kind of hard. I had to search for answers, and I have to deal with it on my own. And because of that, it took a lot of energy and took a lot of emotional toll. um, Especially becoming a professor and like noting that there are also differences in different fields. For example, I was in the engineering field, environmental engineering field, where 40% of environmental engineering is women, right? But then coming into a department such as physics, there's not not that much women, and I can see how that how conversations change, and how there's more like ongoing dialogues about whether we should you know think about diversity issues rather than oh, this is a fact. So because of this, if I were to advise somebody who's a aspiring STEM female, I would say that, first, look for the people who are successful, and then don't make one person's advice and suggestion be the only voice in your head. That's something that I really stress on, is that, some people will give you one set of advice, but if you look around, you can get many sets of advices, and then you can think about which one actually can, you know, uh, you can pull them as well. So yeah, you have different sets of experiences giving you a lot more to think about. So that's something that I would like to tell young students. They don't necessarily have to be somebody who looks like you, but you can uh, uh, ask for different ranges of experiences using the resources and the people that you know. So also books are really helpful. So when I didn't have anybody to tell me what to do, I just went on Amazon and bought books. And
I love that.
just like that. And the reason I was able to do that was because I realized that there's something that I am missing, right? But what if people just don't know that they're missing that, right?
Yeah.
So conversation is so important. Like getting STEM students to understand diversity and inclusion is so important in their undergraduate years, right? To help them talk about diversity and inclusion. I didn't have any vocabulary when I graduated from PhD. I didn't know how to talk about diversity and inclusion in my classroom. I was always told that science is not biased, and but it is. But it is, because the people who are in, who were established are people who did not look like me. And so the narratives were framed by a different set of people with different set of experiences, and therefore it is biased.
Right.
In my point of view. So I would say to increase the our understanding of diversity and inclusion, even starting from like introductory STEM classes, are very important.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I resonated with a lot of what you said. And I think that's so cool that you got books. It's like there's no excuses. Like you can go to your library, you can go to Amazon and get a book, and really like bridge that gap, especially if there's like certain things you can't do within your control. And I totally, to my own like personal experience, I remember my sophomore year in my engineering department being one of the only girls in the class. And I was like complete kind of shock. And I was like, whoa, what, are there any girls in here? Like, and thankfully it got better over time. Like my senior year, there was like 5, and I was like, whoa, we are out here making progress. But yeah, I think that's important, that education piece, and like having vocabulary to talk about it, and also empathy too from the other side, to understand our own experience and how unique it is and how it's filtered by like our position in the world. And so I love that. I love your fearlessness in just moving forward, even despite all of that, and getting to a place where you are now. It's like so incredible. So yeah, it's great. Megan?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything that you guys are saying. And I think I was very lucky to have Professor Tseng along my college journey. And I know that she was definitely a big voice in the department for diversity and inclusion, and still is today. So I think that it's great that you really stick up for different people in the department, for sure. And then to kind of sum up our talk, we usually ask people one question at the end just to see what everyone's response is. And you can take this in regards to any experiences that you've had in the past. So the question is, what kind of impact do you want to make in the future and why?
So, um, so I thought about, what to say. And there are like two things I want to do, I'm just gonna, focus on one thing. So because I started out thinking about, how Western states' thirst for water devastated and impacted the livelihood of the people in another country. Um, because I started out with that, so I'd like to just continue educating the next generation like you about sustainability and environmental justice. Um, and in the whether you pursue science or not, but just think about things from the beginning to the end. how how something can have an impact when it's conceived and its journey before when it's disposed. So it's something that I like to continue educating myself and others about, and I like to make it my impact that way.
Wow, so coming full circle,
Yes.
essentially. Awesome. So like for your research, how would that work? Would you want to do more research in that space, or would you just want to like kind of branch out more into the education space?
For me, I like to just I would never say no to any opportunity, but one of this is the other thing I sort of didn't want to kind of talk about, but I sort
Tell
of
us.
am thinking about I'm thinking about so how science is very, this is coming to the diversity inclusion issue, like how science is very, if you read a textbook in physics, it would start out from ancient Greek and then all the way to like how Europe evolved. So it's very European, it's like a history in Europe. Right? So because of this, I'm thinking about how to like in like education also to expand voices. Everybody is curious in all cultures, right? It's not a privilege to be curious, but it is. It don't. The textbooks are not reflecting that. So I'd like to here my thought is to kind of collect stories about science and how curiosity in other cultures inform their way of life, and then hopefully like eventually create an archive where people can just use, like they want to find resources they can just use um, without having to do the work, like, oh, there's an archive that has these already, how far is the earth from the sun from the Aztecs view instead of the ancient Romans view or something like that. So
Wow, that sounds cool. Professor Tseng, you have to do it. You have to do it now. We're gonna bring you back and we're gonna ask for a follow-up. That sounds like the coolest project ever. Like having different perspectives on something like we all share and it all affects us, I think is so cool. So yeah, kind of want to from there, I want to segue into our takeaways. Um, for me, I took away so much from you, Professor Tseng, but I think the biggest thing for me that I took away is to be fearless despite anything in my like journey, because it was really great to hear how even though when you moved to the physics department and you were the only woman, you still found ways and got creative to navigate that and to get what you need, and then eventually just like keep going and like continue with your work and your research. I think the second piece too, like that you said, was like filter your advice, which I think is super valuable. Just because you hear one data point doesn't mean you need to run with it. Get advice and then figure out what works best and aligns with you. So those are my biggest takeaways.
Yeah, and then I think for me, I think that just like the idea around how these underwear kind of almost randomly got tested, like it was just by chance that they decided to do it, and it wasn't like any company went in and do it like an audit. Like there's no sort of auditing in fashion, and I think there really should be, because really only seeing like this being tested, you just wonder what's in your clothing in general. So I've heard like, especially when it's like waterproof or any sort of like proof, that means there's just chemicals added to it and you just have no idea what it's doing to you. So I think the idea of just like creating an audit for fashion is so important. And definitely to keep doing your research on things and expanding that past that as well, especially with your microplastic research. I think it could be combined into something really brilliant. So thank you so much for sharing everything else today.
Yeah, Professor Tseng, is there any last thoughts you want to share with us before we roll out?
I would like to say that I really I you know I'm just being myself, and I didn't know that people actually can take my advice from life. I didn't know that people can actually take away things from my life that they find useful. And so, but I'd like to say that like also like finding someone you can trust to be your ally is also very important in science. Like you might many times during my journey to get my PhD, many times I wonder, what am I doing? Why is this piece of information that I spent years on going to do anyone any good? So I got jaded, and and then I decided to seek out resources, and that's how I came to this point. But I think that somebody who speaks on your behalf and who listens to you and who kind of like, it doesn't have to be your advice, it could be someone who understands the importance of where you are, what you're going through is very important. So hopefully sometime in the near future we could all be be okay with who we are and okay about what we're doing, where we're gonna go, and hopefully everyone would be comfortable in this space.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And yeah, the ally support system is a game changer. And I think, Professor Tseng, with you being yourself, that is the magic, and that is the thing that does the impact. So thank you for being yourself. I want to encourage you to continue that, because it does make an impact. So with that, we want to wrap up this podcast. We want to thank you so much for listening. Tell us anything that you loved about this podcast, anything that Professor Tseng shared with us today. What did you learn? What did you take away? Feel free to leave us a review or share any comments or send us an email. We love to hear from you. So with that, thank you guys. And we'll see you next time for our next podcast at Styled by Science CEOs.